When it first aired 25 years ago, The Sopranos Season 3 episode Pine Barrens became an instant classic and a fan favorite, but left us with the show's most enduring mystery. What happened to the Russian? When things go wrong with routine collection, gangsters Paulie and Chris end up taking Valery the Russian out to the wilderness to get rid of him. As he tries to run, we see him get shot in the head. Then he keeps moving.
What the fuck?
Then he's gone without a trace. Paulie and Chris follow his footprints and blood trail, but he seems to have vanished into thin air. He's never seen again. Ever since this happened, viewers have wondered about the fate of Valery. Is he alive or dead? Did he somehow escape? The show's most famous mystery, the cut to black in the series finale, has been exhaustively discussed, dissected, and analyzed. And just like the cut to black, clues for the mystery of Pine Barrens are hidden in the show itself. So here's the answer. Valery is Jesus Christ, and he disappeared because he ascended to heaven.
What did you say?
Now, if that sounds absurd, bear with me and I'll explain the evidence for this, what it means, and why it happened. But before talking about Jesus, I need to talk about the devil, Ralph Cifaretto, who is surrounded by hints linking him to Satan from his first episode to his last. After arriving from Miami, down below where it's hot,
Hell is hot. That's never been disputed by anybody.
his first appearance in the show is in the flames,
Well, well. No more fires.
and there's a lot more. I'll show a few of the hints on screen. What's important about this example is that David Chase has explicitly confirmed that they wrote in the satanic hints surrounding Ralph.
The goat symbolism was definitely there in this episode, and Ralphie as Satan.
While this quotation is referring to the season 4 episode Whoever Did This, the point I'm making is that a character can represent a biblical figure for the purpose of telling a deeper story. It's not that the devil literally took the form of Ralph Cifaretto just so he could cause a little trouble in the mortal realm. The point is that Ralph symbolically fills the role of the devil, leading Jackie Jr. into temptation, corruption, and destruction. This is a context that I want to put Valery in. He's been symbolically linked to Jesus to tell a story which is deeper than a couple of gangsters getting lost in the woods. Let's start looking at what's hidden in the episode, the centerpiece being a symbolic reenactment of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Chris and Paulie are, of course, the Roman soldiers. Chris is dressed in the deep red associated with the Romans, and the color scheme for the whole scene is neutral, sandy colors reminiscent of the era. To start the fight, Paulie smashes a glass bottle onto Valery's head, giving him a series of small lacerations similar to those caused by the crown of thorns, which was placed on Jesus' head just before crucifixion. During the fight, instead of pulling out their guns, Paulie uses a standing lamp to strangle Valery. This long pole lies across him at shoulder height, giving an image reminiscent of crucifixion. And in case you think that this is just what they happened to have on set and they improvised, the standing lamp is specified in the script. After being seemingly killed by Roman soldiers, his body is wrapped and then put into the tomb, that is, the trunk of the car. We cut directly from the entombment to Gloria's card,
I'm feeling very sheepish.
alluding to John 1:29, "Behold, the Lamb of God that taketh away the sin of the world," an appropriate fit here after the crucifixion. Later, upon opening the tomb, it's discovered that he has been resurrected in the sense that they expected him to be dead, but he is alive rather than having vanished from the tomb. It's shortly after this that he disappears mysteriously without a trace. After Valery vanishes, leaving a trail of blood to nowhere, it cuts directly to AJ watching TV. AJ is watching a music video for the song Coffee and TV by Blur and features a milk carton which has a missing person alert on it. What is not shown in The Sopranos but happens at the end of the video is that milk carton dies and flies up to heaven with angel wings. But Valery has gone missing, so the reference is as simple as that, right? No need to bring up the angel wings. Okay, well, is there anything else which might suggest flying up to heaven on wings?
We drink.
Slava is drinking Grey Goose vodka when he's talking about Valery. Grey Goose is a conspicuous choice as it's a French vodka, a little surprising for a Russian to be drinking, and like the standing lamp, the Grey Goose is specified in the script. Maybe there's something behind this choice. The bottle is placed on the table exactly so the desk lamp makes a golden halo directly above the bird's head. He does this while talking about Valery, and even stops talking to look directly at the bird with the halo. A halo is traditionally used to show divinity, but can also be used to signify death. Here's a couple of examples of creatively filmed halos in the show, signifying divinity with Father Intentola, and with Davy Scatino when he's suicidal and close to death. Then, when cutting back to the Pine Barrens a few minutes later, we get this shot of geese flying in the sky. Animals for people is probably the most well-known use of symbolism in Sopranos. Valery is represented by the goose and has flown to the sky, that is, ascended to heaven. Now, a quick aside to point out that David Chase is a big fan of puns and wordplay, and The Sopranos is stacked with examples. I'll show a few here, you can pause if you want to read them. But the point is that spirit can mean both distilled alcoholic drink and ghost. When interviewed just after the episode aired in 2001, Chase said,
"The Russian guy was like something out of a fairy tale. Well, not a fairy tale exactly. He's more like a spirit."
Continuing the heavenly bird theme, the grey goose is emphasized by another bird which sits on the same desk, the desert eagle. Slava's desert eagle is probably the most unique and conspicuous gun in the entire show, with its custom gold features and ivory-colored grip. This is a custom piece supplied by a prop weapons company, and according to the INFDB, it is the original use of the prop, suggesting that it was made for the show. It's worth pointing out that white grips are very rare on Desert Eagles, as we can see on all other listings from both the prop weapon company and the IMFDB. Even the comically ostentatious Massive Genius has a bog-standard black grip on his Desert Eagle. My reading of the white and gold color scheme is that it's a deliberately heavenly design for something named after a bird, underlining the heavenly grey goose, both of which fit with how a dove is used to depict the Holy Spirit in traditional Christian symbolism. Slava also tells Tony how when they were soldiers, Valery saved his life and is closer than a brother. So Valery is literally his personal savior and closer to him than family, both of which are the way people often talk about a relationship with Jesus. The universal remote is the Holy Trinity. When Paulie looks at the entertainment center, he points out three things.
Look at this shit. TV, stereo, DVD.
So he has specified three things and then is confounded by the remote,
The fuck's this?
which is three things combined into one. Valery wants it to be put in its proper place,
Universal remote. Put it down on docking station.
and Paulie disrespecting and desecrating this is what angers Valery in the first place, starting the fight. The episode starts with Irina phoning Tony's boat. For the plot, this phone call sets up conflict and tension between Tony and Gloria, but the call is used to slip in a subtle bit of foreshadowing. Irina's excuse for calling Tony is that she's lost something, but she hasn't lost her sunglasses, an earring, or a scarf. She's lost something a lot more specific, her religious medal. Now, if there is any doubt as to what her religious medal is, a line in the shooting script gives a little more clarity. My religious medal, the cross of Saint Cyril. The cross is, of course, a symbol of Jesus Christ. So we're starting off the episode with a symbol for Jesus which has gone missing. Later on, we'll see Valery as another symbol for Jesus who also goes missing. Now, all this symbolism is a very indirect way to tell a story.
Indirect, not straightforward.
How about oblique? And the script gives another hint which didn't make it into the final episode. Along with oblique, the shooting script specifies that stigma is also on the board. Stigma is the singular form of plural stigmata, referring to the marks from the crucifixion. And as a bonus, The word stigmata was used in place of stigma earlier in season 3.
There's no stigmata these days.
In a final touch to the Scrabble scene, we have this picture hanging on Meadow's wall. Swans Reflecting Elephants by Salvador Dali. While this isn't anything to do with Christianity or Jesus, it fits here as it touches upon the idea of a hidden identity being revealed by taking a different perspective.
They pick up strangers in bars and truck stops.
Oh, God, his face. He didn't even look like a person anymore.
Can't let your mind
I'll be
dwell
honest
on.
with you. Unless I heard it from David Chase himself, I don't like this analytic stuff. Sometimes the show is just a show.
Turn that off.
You're making it like a very difficult jigsaw puzzle.
Okay, so we have a bunch of hints that seem to point towards Jesus. What does this mean? What's the point of it, and what story is being told? While the narrative of Pine Barrens is about Chris and Paulie together, the allegory and subtext is all about Paulie. Everything that matters here is done by Paulie, with Chris either passive or protesting. The final shot of this story is a close-up of a defeated and contemplative Paulie glaring out the window at the trees, alone. Paulie's story in Pine Barrens is a thematic follow-up to the Season 2 episode, From Where to Eternity. After Christopher sees a vision of what he thinks is hell during his near-death experience, Paulie becomes spooked when he starts to think about his own fate. He goes to a psychic and comes to believe that he's dragging around the ghosts of everyone he's ever killed.
Fucking quiz!
This leads him to angrily confront his priest, as Paulie expects that his financial contributions to the church should have bought him a corresponding level of spiritual protection.
You've been slacking off on me, and you left me unprotected.
When he concludes that he hasn't got his money's worth, he turns his back on the church, even taking a moment to stare down Jesus on the way out. It is this which sets the stage for the events of Pine Barrens, and the audience is even given a quick reminder of this at the end of the previous episode.
Why'd you go to that psychic last year, since you don't dwell on this shit?
But that was different. Chrissy was shot. That was a paranormal event.
That psychic told you those guys were haunting you, the guys that you,
While From Where to Eternity is about Paulie treating his religion as though it's mob business, expecting that he can pay off the church as a spiritual protection racket, and that serving time in purgatory will account for his sins, Pine Barrens is the follow-up in which we get a view of his life now that he's abandoned the church. It's just that rather than being done with surface narrative, it's done as an allegory. The surface-level story of being lost in the woods is a metaphor for how Paulie is morally lost, wandering through his life without any sense of direction and little hope of salvation.
Let's go with the satin finish. Excuse me.
Let's add one more ingredient to the mix. I've spoken about Valery as Jesus, that is, God the Son, innocent and punished for the sins of others. We have the bird representing the Holy Ghost, that is, God the Spirit. To complete the Trinity, we can add God the Father, Tony, the Godfather. In Paulie's allegory, Tony is cast in the role of God as authority. He operates as a distant voice, sometimes unclear, telling Paulie what to do, and is Paulie's ultimate commander and judge, to be obeyed and feared.
I said, are you fucking kidding me?
Emphasizing this, in one scene, Tony is placed outside a large church while he's talking to Paulie. Paulie complains that Tony speaks to him like he's a child.
You had to hear him on the phone before, talking to me like a child.
Well, if Paulie is a child, then that would make Tony the father. Now, it's important to point out that I'm only talking about how Tony relates to Paulie in this episode, and that the allegory is confined to Paulie's story. I don't mean that God is having an affair with a Mercedes saleswoman, or that God's father-in-law has glaucoma. Obviously, the allegory just works with certain story beats. Jesus Christ didn't kill 16 Czechoslovakians. Having said that, let's take a look through the whole thing, beat by beat. Part 1 establishes Paulie's situation, a man who believes in God but doesn't follow Christianity. God tells Paulie to go to Jesus, but he's baffled by the religion.
The fuck's this?
Jesus tells him to respect the religion,
Put it down on darkened station.
and Paulie is angered by Jesus telling him how to live his life.
I have come to take on my shoulders the sins of the world. He who would follow me must do the same.
Listen to this prick giving orders.
Paulie rejects his instruction and desecrates the Trinity, symbolically rejecting the religion. Then we have part 2, in which we are shown in order the crown of thorns, the crucifixion, entombment, resurrection, and ascension. Part 3 of the allegory is showing us Paulie's fate having rejected Christ as he wanders aimlessly through his life. He thinks he knows where he's going, but he doesn't. And you can interpret much of the dialogue in this section as part of the allegory.
How about some advice?
You want my advice? You stay there till the morning and you find this guy.
We're trying. Don't make me pull a rank on you, kid.
Fuck you, Paulie. Captain or no captain, right now we're just two assholes lost in the woods. I'll leave you here, you one-shoe cocksucker! You know how fast I can run, I'll leave you in the fucking dust!
But let's be clear on this right now. This cocksucker crawls out from under a rock. He's your problem, not mine. You deal with Slava, you take the heat, you pay the price.
Hell is hot. That's never been disputed by anybody.
Fine.
This is a fitting way to end it, as Paulie's refusal to take responsibility for his actions is a central motif in Barrens, whether you look at that in terms of his business or his soul. He laments his fate as though it's something that happened to him rather than the path he chose for himself.
What the fuck? What'd you do?
Would I have a choice? It got bad, T. We had no choice. It was Silvio's money. He should have got it himself.
Shouldn't have hit the guy.
I shouldn't have even been there!
He never acknowledges that he is the one responsible for his own situation. Rather than take responsibility for his actions, Paulie constantly shifts blame onto others.
Freak sucker punch me. Your nephew. Sometimes he don't think before he acts. That's all I'm gonna say.
In contrast, Chris actually acknowledges mistakes made, to which Paulie only reacts with anger and mockery. Like Ebenezer Scrooge, who was shown a vision of the future and given a chance to change, Paulie has been given a glimpse of his future if he continues to reject the moral path. After his ordeal, God swoops in to rescue him, finally talking to him face to face with his most important message. You must take responsibility for your decisions, and you will face the consequences of your actions. Aside from his spiritual crisis in From Where to Eternity, looking at the character of Paulie in broader terms across the series, he's often used to deal with existential ideas compared to Silvio, for example, who's a very grounded character who just deals with business matters. In Season 1, we get our first real characterization of Paulie when he talks to Chris about how he's drifted through his life. In Season 6, he is thrown into an existential crisis when he finds out that he's adopted and that he no longer knows who he is. And then when he has a cancer scare, he must face his mortality. The ideas dealt with in Barrens fit nicely with the kind of storylines the show often gives him. Of course, it's always possible to overanalyze and read too much into things, imagining links where they don't really exist. Maybe I'm just stretching anything to fit my theory, and it's all just a coincidence. The crown of thorns is just a normal head wound incurred in a fight. Valery didn't actually stretch his arms out to make the crucifix pose, so having the bar across his neck doesn't mean anything. Gangsters always put the body in the trunk, I mean, where else would they put him? Maybe the Grey Goose is just product placement. Irina's missing religious medal is only confirmed as a Christian cross in a line which didn't make the final cut, so strictly speaking is not canon and therefore can be disregarded. And the same goes for stigma on the Scrabble board. Maybe the music video is just using the milk carton to represent somebody going missing, simple as that. The swans reflecting elephants painting is just a nod to the revelation of another side to a character, as Meadow finds out that Jackie is a cheater, and Tony finds out that Gloria has a crazy side. And while Paulie specifies 3 items on the entertainment center, there's also a VCR that he doesn't mention, meaning the universal remote does more than 3 things, so it can't be the Holy Trinity. Basically, it's all just a coincidence, and each of the things that seems to work as some sort of religious symbolism is me cherry-picking to fit my theory. Okay, perhaps, but then why did Valery disappear? I mean, it's fine to dismiss all this symbolism as reaching and coincidence, but Valery had just been shot in the head. Chris and Paulie were at most 20 seconds behind him. They followed his blood and footprints, and he was just gone. If all the story required was for Chris and Paulie to lose track of him and then get lost in a forest, it would have been the easiest thing in the world to just leave out the bit where they follow his blood trail to nowhere. They would run in his general direction, assume they lost his trail, and then we have exactly the same ambiguous episode, with them wandering around and a question mark over the fate of Valery. But Chase goes out of his way to show that they successfully follow his trail until he inexplicably vanishes. This fits with the Sopranos style of supernatural or spiritual events being presented ambiguously, which the viewer can reasonably consider real or not. When Paulie sees the psychic knows enough specific information that it's reasonable for a viewer to believe that his psychic powers, and therefore the ghosts, are real in the world of the show. But there's also enough room to doubt it and say that the supposed psychic just got lucky with some skillful fishing and cold reading. Chris's vision of the afterlife could be a real vision which Carmela prayed for God to show him, or it could just be dismissed as a dream or morphine-induced hallucination. When the ghost of Pussy is seen in the mirror, this could be taken as a real glimpse of his ghost, or just an artistic way to show that Tony is metaphorically haunted by the memory of his dead friend. When Paulie sees the Virgin Mary at the Bing, we can believe that she really appeared before him, or that he's just hallucinating for some reason. Unlike most shows which are set squarely in the real world and have no supernatural element, and others in which the supernatural of various forms is canon, The Sopranos sits in an unusual place just in between, never confirming its position in either group. In keeping with Chase's fondness for ambiguity, the supernatural or spiritual world is something that the show dips its toe into without ever confirming, and the disappearance of Valery is done in this way. We don't see him disappear before our eyes as a confirmed paranormal event, but his disappearance is deliberately shown in a way that doesn't seem to make sense. You can take the hints that Valery vanished into thin air because he ascended to heaven, but there's enough wiggle room that you can rationalize an earthly explanation if you want to. But just one more thing. In Season 6, when Paulie sees the Virgin Mary in the Bing, there is just one bottle visible in the whole scene. It's in the dark and partially obscured, but I'm fairly certain that this is a bottle of Grey Goose. It's clear glass with a frosted finish and a shiny midsection. It has exactly the same shape, along with a dark cap. The bottle of Spirit, which was symbolically linked to Jesus rising to heaven in Pine Barrens, now shows up in the background of a shot in which Paulie sees a vision of the Virgin Mary. This brings us to David Chase's detail-oriented style of production. Although the episode was written by Terence Winter, Chase has ultimate responsibility for the final result and is renowned for being intimately involved with all details of production, not just the script, but all sorts of visual details of the characters and sets. Okay, so what does he say? At various times in different interviews, he's claimed that he does know what happened to the Russian, and also that he doesn't know. He has made it clear that he never imagined explaining any further, but also he has said that there is a neat ending to the story. I'm going to be going through what he said about this to try and make some sense of it and work out what we should pay attention to and what is him bullshitting. Just after Season 3 aired in 2001, Chase said this in an interview with the New York Times.
It was just a spectacularly different kind of episode, and the Russian guy was like something out of a fairy tale.
20 years later, in a retrospective of Pine Barrens, Chase was still saying the same thing.
I don't know what happened to the Russian. I should have known why there was such a big hue and cry about it, but I just kept saying, it's just a fairy tale.
While fairy tales are often set in the woods, they typically include supernatural or magical elements. Witches and magic spells, dragons, elves, and talking animals. Chase's insistence upon referring to Pine Barrens as a fairy tale implies something magical or supernatural. With the surface reading of the episode, in which there is no supernatural element, why repeatedly refer to it as a fairy tale? Sure, there's a superficial similarity of just being lost in the woods, but Chase specifically says that Valery himself is like something out of a fairy tale, as though there's something special about him. This fits with the decision to have Valery vanish suddenly in a seemingly impossible way, rather than for Chris and Paulie to simply lose track of him, a point he specifically made at an event in 2017.
I felt that it was more in keeping with a Russian folktale or something, that the guy just disappears. Now, we didn't do folktales every week, but it seemed appropriate for this.
The fact that this was the first thing he said after it aired in 2001, before the mystery had become a legend, and he's still repeating it 20 years later, means this is something worth taking seriously. I've been talking about this story as an allegory, while Chase calls it a fairy tale. Whatever you call it, it's a story with mystery, morality, and a bit of magic. It also fits with the trend of having one episode each season where they really push the boat out in terms of doing something with a lot of carefully crafted symbolism. With the exception of season 4, every season has something like this. Now, it's important to address the two most commonly believed things which did not happen. A, Valery climbed a tree. B, Valery was rescued by Boy Scouts. When Valery disappears, we see this shot from above, which many viewers have taken to be from his point of view, having climbed a tree. This is not the case, and has been dismissed in no uncertain terms by everyone involved. When an interviewer states that Valery went up the tree, David Chase quickly corrects him.
And Pine Barrens, it was done.
Pine Barrens, you mean the Russian?
Yeah. I mean he goes up the tree and that's...
Yeah, and then people began, he never went up a tree, but people...
Often in his interviews, he likes to give evasive answers, but on this point, he immediately corrects the mistaken belief that Valery climbed the tree. While Chase doesn't like to tell viewers how to interpret the show, he doesn't mind correcting something completely incorrect. Pine Barrens director Steve Buscemi, who is in charge of the shoot, confirms that it was not meant to be a POV shot.
And then you see that shot from overhead. And is Valery in the tree at that point?
I know that was really kind of a mistake on my part. It wasn't meant to be a POV of Valery.
No, okay. Because I mean that's what I think. I'm saying this guy, he's a Russian Green Beret. Maybe he climbed.
I know. I think it kind of works as that. And I talked about it with David Chase. He says, yeah, that shot you did from overhead, it makes people think that. And I said, I know, but you're the one who kept it in. Like, you kept it in the show. He goes, I know, it was a good shot. I guess I could blame it on Phil Abraham.
Buscemi points to director of photography Phil Abraham, who actually set up and filmed that shot.
In those days, there were no drones or anything. If I had a drone, I would have put them out in the clearest opening. I needed the tree for camera support. I liked that shot and I never thought twice about it. And then David came up to me after it was cut and everything and goes, I've been meaning to talk to you about this. Why the fuck did you shoot that shot? That makes me think the Russian's in the tree. I said to him, well, David, look, I didn't really think of it that way. I just wanted to get this sort of bird-like perspective on two of them. And I had plenty of coverage for the two of them looking around, and you didn't have to use it. He sort of begrudgingly was like, with his twisted little sour face, yeah.
Phil Abraham's statement is most interesting, as he revealed more than the fact it wasn't intended as a POV shot. He reveals that Chase was actually annoyed that the shot suggested that Valery had climbed the tree. As I stated earlier, the episode is filmed and edited in such a way to make it clear that Valery disappeared suddenly and inexplicably, rather than Chris and Paulie simply losing track of him. This is confirmed by the script, which specifies 3 times that Valery disappeared in a clearing, an area which, by definition, doesn't have trees. The fact that it was intended to happen out in a clearing, that Abraham wanted a bird-like perspective, and that Chase was annoyed when he realized that it could be interpreted as Valery having climbed the tree, really hammered down the idea that Valery didn't just lose then in the forest, but was meant to have vanished into thin air. So if Chase disliked the implication that Valery climbed a tree, why did he use that shot? It stands to reason that while Chase was editing, he didn't think of it as Valery having climbed a tree. Chase himself does all final editing of every episode and takes as much time as he can, as he himself explains. So why did he use that shot that makes it look as though Valery was up a tree? I would speculate that to Chase, it was a shot that perfectly fitted with what was actually happening, that being looking down not from a tree, but from a bird's eye view or from heaven. If this was his intention of the meaning of the scene, then it would make sense of him using that shot. But when the episode was complete and he realized that other people thought it was showing a point of view shots from Valery up a tree, he was annoyed about it and expressed that annoyance at Buscemi and Abraham. While the focus of this video is the episode of Pine Barrens itself and the creative decisions behind it, an idea of how to conclude the story was proposed by Terence Winter a few years later and has gained significant standing amongst fans. It goes something like this.
I had pitched David on the idea of, like, 2 years later, Christopher goes to see Slava and he walks in and the guy is sweeping the floor again, and Christopher, they meet eyes, and Christopher's like, holy shit, he knows me. And then the guy, and Valery, the Russian guy, turns around and half the back of his head is gone. He's like clearly brain damaged. He doesn't remember anything. And Christopher is like, oh my God. And it's like the guy's completely a vegetable who's just, he just sweeps the floor. But he keeps looking at Christopher like, I know, I just can't communicate. And David was on board with it, or so I thought. And I think I made the fatal error. I said, oh man, the audience is going to love this. And he went, well, that's the worst reason in the world to do it. Because fuck it,
That's not a good.
Over the years, this has been repeated several times by both Winter and Chase, and many fans seem to believe it as canon, as though it actually happened and is part of the story. It is not. First, let's put this in context. It should be noted that this is simply one of many unused story ideas that the writers come up with. There was an idea that Tony has an affair with Danielle from Whippany, but it never happened. There was an idea that while having a party, a fight breaks out, one of the guys is killed, and this is witnessed by the mob wives at the party. This story never happened, but was developed into what became the episode Soprano Home Movies. The writers come up with many ideas for possible stories which never get made. Chase and the team of writers spent ages sitting around in the writer's room, coming up with story ideas, developing them, and then rejecting them and starting again with new ideas. Winter's idea that Valery would be discovered with brain damage working for Slava and that he had been rescued by Boy Scouts is just that. One of many ideas a writer had which was discarded. It is not something that actually happened in the show, and it is not the fate of Valery. Winter shared the audience's desire for closure and had to fight for it against a resistant Chase. His idea was considered and rejected.
He couldn't fucking sell it.
But most importantly for this discussion, it wasn't something that was on the table when Pine Barrens was written and filmed. It's just something that Winter came up with a few years later because the audience was looking for a conclusion to the story, and so was he. The difference between this unused story idea and the countless other unused stories that we never hear about is simply that this one relates to a subject that people constantly ask about in interviews. A final nail in the coffin of the found by Boy Scouts idea comes when noticing that Terence Winter recycled this plot device later in season 5 in long-term parking. While car crashes are used repeatedly in the show for a plot convenience, a troop of Boy Scouts stumbling across a body in the wild is so incredibly specific that I think it's fair to interpret its use as confirmation that this idea had been fully rejected as the fate of Valery.
So I think the consolation was there was a line of dialogue at the bottom being where like, Boy Scouts probably found him or something, or he got eaten by squirrels or whatever. Who gives a shit anyway? Just to put it on for that.
Winter is speaking pretty loosely here about the consolation dialogue from this scene in the season 5 opener. Obviously, the Boy Scouts and eaten by squirrels weren't things that were said in that scene. Boy Scouts was the resolution that he had wanted, and Eaten by Squirrels is just taking a line that was said in Pine Barrens. But the important part here is the ending of who gives a shit anyway, as this part is correct and used in the scene as the final word on the fate of Valery that the show gives us. The consolation that Winter is referring to is that while no closure is given, the mystery was at least acknowledged before being formally dismissed.
Where's he now, you think? Who the fuck cares? Right, Quincy?
Who the fuck knows?
Chris and Paulie saying, who the fuck cares, who the fuck knows, is like a fourth wall break from Chase, speaking directly to the audience, acknowledging the mystery but keeping in line with what he had always said about it from the beginning. That story is done. There's no continuation to it. Who the fuck cares, who the fuck knows.
They shot a guy. Who knows where he went? Who cares about some Russian? This is what Hollywood has done to America. Do you have to have closure on every little thing? Isn't there any mystery in the world?
But hang on, David Chase has also repeated the story of Valery being found by Boy Scouts, so doesn't that confirm it as canon? Whether or not the author can retroactively change canon is an open question and a matter of opinion, but the fact remains that Chase did repeat Winter's story about the Boy Scouts. Let's listen to what he says.
He never went up a tree, but people...
What did he do? Do you know what he did?
Yeah.
How did he get out of there?
We had it figured out. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
He collapsed and he was found by some Boy Scouts. And they got in touch with somehow he was carrying a piece of ID that led them back to his boss, Slava, the Russian guy. He was put in a hospital, and he was like completely his massive brain trauma.
Right.
And he was sent back to Russia.
And that's it. So that story is completed.
Yeah.
That's great.
But I never said that. And
right.
So people were all like, well, what happened to the Russian?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you
But I had to fill that in. I mean, it could have been something else. He could have, I don't know.
It's interesting that...
been kind of an American Idol. I don't know.
While Chase repeats the bare bones of the story, Valery was found by Boy Scouts and survived with brain damage. What's important is what he says next. Just like how Chase corrects the interviewer when he stated that Valery went up tree, he's quick to correct him when he thinks that being fobbed off with a few lines of retroactive closure means the story is complete. Chase goes on to say that anything could have happened, demonstrating this with the deliberately absurd outcome of Valery winning American Idol. The point Chase is making here is that this retroactive closure is meaningless. He could tell you that Valery was rescued by Boy Scouts. He could tell you that Valery became the next American Idol. Or he could tell you that Valery's dead and frozen body was found by a park ranger and never identified. But none of these things happened. There's mystery, ambiguity, and room for the viewer to interpret it. The interviewer demonstrates here exactly the attitude of desiring closure for the sake of closure, which Chase dislikes and openly laments. He told a story with an ambiguous ending, and ever since has been faced with an audience pleading, just say something, anything, as long as it's not nothing. Just tell us anything so we can tie it up with a ribbon and a bow and be done with it.
I don't know. Why are these things there? Is this intentional? Is it not?
You sound like, when you get so deep like this, you ruin it for the people watching it because it's too complicated.
Mannaggia la miseria. This thing gets on my nerves.
Don't get me started.
Sometimes things are just what they are.
And sometimes they're not, my friend. Sometimes they're not.
You're telling me.
Enough.
While Pine Barrens gave us the second most notorious mystery of the show, the most famous is, of course, the cut to black in the finale, which makes a useful reference point when looking at how Chase engineers his mysteries and then how he talks about them. While people might disagree when interpreting the final scene, what most people can agree on is that there are hints, symbols, and clues placed throughout the final season which point towards Tony's death. While his methods may be subtle and ultimately open for interpretation, they are done carefully and deliberately and are shown on the screen. Chase is famous for being reluctant to talk about the ending. He doesn't want to do the viewer's thinking for them, and is evasive when repeatedly asked about the meaning of the cut to black. The day after the finale first aired, he gave an interview in which he said,
I have no interest in explaining, defending, reinterpreting, or adding to what is there. Anybody who wants to watch it, it's all there.
A few months later, he repeated the sentiment.
If you look at the final episode really carefully, it's all there. This isn't lost. When you see it, we've shed light on everything.
Now, for context, this was midway through the airing of Lost, which was notorious at the time for heaping mystery upon mystery without ever explaining much. But Chase repeatedly tells us that everything we need is on the screen. And those who have looked at the analysis of the ending can see that what he said was true. It's all there. But that's the cut to black. How about Pine Barrens? Well, in the 2021 retrospective of Pine Barrens, Chase echoed exactly the same idea. A statement contributed by Valery's actor Vitaly Baganov simply read, "Everything is up on the screen," to which Chase replied,
"I agree with that."
Just like with the cut to black, Chase has presented us with an ambiguous mystery, but he has also given the answers if we will only look carefully at what's on screen. I'll finish this essay with a line that Chase chose to close out Pine Barrens with, when in the final scene, Melfi tells us,
"Read into things however you choose."
Considering the allegory and symbolism in the episode, it's a perfect way to cap it off. If my interpretation gives you another way to understand the episode, then that's great. If you think that anything or everything I've said here is bullshit, and it's just a fun story about gangsters running around in the woods, then that's fine too. Either way, it's a fantastic episode. Read into things however you choose.